Hello and welcome to the Fire in the Valley show. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we're joined by the Lois Letchford. So first of all, good morning, Lois.
Good morning, Pete. It's great to be here. I love the topic of your show.
Thank you very much. Listen, I'm delighted to have you on, so it's going to be great. So first of all, I'm going to give our listeners just a bit of a background to Lois. So Lois Letchford's dyslexia came to light at the age of 39 when she faced teaching her 7-year-old non-reading son, Nicholas. Examining her reading failure caused her to adapt and change lessons for her son. The results were dramatic. Lois qualified as a reading specialist to use her non-traditional background, multi-continental experience, and passion to assist other failing students. Her teaching and learning have equipped her with a unique skill set and perspective. As a teacher, she considers herself a literacy problem solver. Reversed, a memoir is her first book. In the story, she details her dyslexia and the journey of her son's dramatic failure in first grade. She tells of the twists and turns that promoted her passion and her son's dramatic academic turnaround, as in 2018. He received his PhD and all is good. Thank you. That's a good start. Hopefully that's not bad for dyslexic myself as well. So reading that out is a bit of a challenge for me. So love it. Oh, it's great. Welcome to the show. Honestly, it's great to have you on here. So
we've obviously got a lot to talk about because
we have a lot to talk about. I got diagnosed at 37. So yeah. So there you go. I'm a bit of a late bloomer, let's just say.
I've never been diagnosed. I never want to have official diagnosis because the thought of going through that test to say, oh, you're stupid, unless you really thought you were, would kill me.
Wow.
It's fascinating whether you get diagnosed or not, but I know from my symptoms and the struggles I've had that I am dyslexic.
That's intriguing because I got diagnosed. I have 3 young girls and I got diagnosed for them so that if we're going through the system, we can sort of highlight it quicker. Yes. And unintentionally, it's actually had an unintended impact on my life. So we know for them, we know to look out for it. It was always one of those running jokes,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
But how is it for you? Tell me, because I mean, obviously, this has been a big part of your journey now.
Yes. How was it for me? Well, see, I grew up reading words that I couldn't comprehend in school, and I went to school in the 1960s. The fact that I could read words stopped me from being a total outcast in school, but it didn't make reading easy, and I can still remember, trying to read books, and I would say it was like wading through mud up to my neck. And you just keep plodding and pushing forward, but really not enjoying it, just taking so much mental effort to come out with so little.
And I think that's a really distinct point, isn't it? Because the way it was described to me, it's not that you can't read. It's just that you'll never do it for leisure or pleasure.
I do now.
Fantastic.
I read everything, and I read diligently. I love reading, and I get quite cranky that so many books, so poorly written, have done so well. And bestseller list, and you think, this is terrible. Look at the number of pages in the first chapter. There's 70, and all I'm doing is flipping. When does this chapter end?
I love it. I love it. What changed then?
The first thing, the big change in my life was when I got married. So here's me. And okay, I went to school. I went through a school to do teacher education training and became a physical education teacher. I went back to a school and taught kids. And I thought, I've had enough of this. I want to do something different in my life. And so I took a working holiday in the UK. And I stayed there for about 3 years. And while I'm on a bus trip to Oxford one day, I met this guy who had an Australian accent. And so I thought, I've got to talk to him. He was younger than me, and I heard him say he was on a scholarship. And any person, moving from Australia to the UK on a scholarship is super smart. He was. I met him. We had family come from the same area of Brisbane. And then a couple of years later, we were married.
Nice. You've got a good eye. You pick them well.
Ah, it's fascinating, that choice of life partner, who you choose and who you go with, because my family grew up on a dairy farm in southeast Queensland, and money was always a worry. Is there enough money to pay the bills? And that was, I was not going to marry someone who's going to leave me on the breadline, because our family were on the breadline, I think, for most of our childhood. We always had food because we were on a farm, but the quality of life appears good. But when you're worried about putting food on the table and paying the bills, life's a struggle. And many people are like that today. And my mum and dad worked. We went to school. You look after yourself.
And had you a big family, many siblings?
Oh, there's four in our family. One brother and 3 sisters. And even that's interesting, because at the time, my older cousins all went to work. And because we were on the farm, the expectation in our farming community was that girls would stay at home and get married. And my mother said, my girls are being educated. And she fought for us to be educated. And it made a huge difference in my life. But it was a fight for her. It was a battle for her to have her girls educated.
Was your mother educated?
No. And my mother's dyslexic.
Mm.
I'm working with my son, Nicholas, in Oxford. He's 7. She's having her 70th birthday. And she said, Lois, I needed help in school like you were giving Nicholas.
Wow.
And it's fascinating, because like you're dyslexic, you start looking back onto all the signs and symptoms. My mother rarely read. She read the Bible, and the Bible was really the only book she read. She taught Sunday school to young children, and in the Sunday school, every lesson she did with pictures. You could see her mind working, needing the pictures and telling the story through pictures. So she could read and write, but she never did very well in school. But she made sure that we were educated. What she was very good at was creating dresses, designing a dress and making it. That spatial awareness, and that was her skill.
That's quite common, isn't it? You get an overcompensation in other senses. When you get one, either through disguising or compensating or whatever else it is, but suddenly their spatial awareness, as you say, that creativity, that it fires up the other genes.
I didn't get that. I didn't get any of those things.
Oh.
Yeah. I can't say that. I remember really feeling, in about 6th or 7th grade, I've got nothing going for me.
Wow.
I can't do anything. So that was the way it was. Anyway, moving on. That's my story, but it took me a long time to realize, how dyslexic I am and the impact it had on my life. It overrides everything. And then marrying this man who's brilliant at everything and reads everything was a huge impact. And then when you have children, of course, the one thing I did to my boys was read and read and read and read and read. And we'd find these funny books and just read and read and read. And that helps me as well. So your reading to children actually helps you.
Was it opposites attract with your husband?
Oh, must be. Yeah. Well, I'm adventurous and I'm game to try anything. And what it did was allowed him to have his career and me follow along. Our sons are in their 30s now, and my eldest says, it took me a long time to realize that wives don't always say yes.
Oh, it's awesome. It's great. It's quite a reflection to have that, really, isn't it? To have that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was Nicholas's story. Nicholas went to school in 1994, and I knew there was a problem. I don't know how your girls are going, but I knew there was a problem, and he didn't want to go to school on the first day of grade 1, and we found a stick insect. And so we put that in a little box and gave it air holes and sent him to school with that. And at the end of the day, I said, did you get to show your teacher? And he just said, no. And I thought, this is terrible. And on day 6 of school, I said to the teacher, how's this going? And she just went, oh, well, he's so far behind. I don't know how I'm going to help him. I just thought, I should have taken him out of school then. My story is a long-term case study, and I'll tell the story and then come back to that. Okay, so I send him to school every day throughout that year. My boy's wetting his pants, he's biting his fingernails and staring into space. Why did I send him to school? Because if you don't, the school comes back to you and they say, well, he's failing because you failed to teach him. You took him out of school. If you had left him here, he would have been fine.
Yeah.
I'll come back to that. Keep a point. Dot point.
So grade 1 is what age? Just give us a timeline on
6, 5.5, 6. Yeah.
So he's being assessed at 5.5 at 6 casually by somebody, I'm assuming, who's not trained in no way to assess them. It's just a teacher saying it's a pain.
That was the start. And then he gets assessed at 6.5 in the last 2 weeks of the school year in Australia. And what does the testing show? It shows he's got no strengths. He can read 10 words and he's got a low IQ. What did the child do in that day when he was testing with that lady? He just refused to cooperate. But they have it on paper. Your child has a low IQ. He refused to work with us. Therefore, he's not very smart. So your fire in the belly is fascinating. Anyway, as it happens, the following year, 1995, my husband has study leave back in Oxford. My husband did his PhD in Oxford. And we go back to Oxford with the boys. We arrive in July. Schools go on holiday, so there's another 6 weeks gone because Nicholas refuses to work while his brother's at home. I took a series of books with me to help him learn to read called Success for All. Words on a page, he's to decode the word, say the word, and then move on. By the time he went from the beginning of the page to the end of the page, Nicholas had forgotten the first words at the beginning of the page. Forget it. And I end up being like the first grade teacher. Come on, you've got to work harder. You've got to do this. And my mother-in-law was with me and she said, Lois, put away what's not working and make learning fun. Good. And I needed that input. When something's going wrong, sometimes you don't know how to break it and you need someone to say, this isn't okay. Let's find another way. And they were the words that did it for me. And it was fantastic because I'm sitting there thinking, what do I do now? Because internally I'm panicking. How is this kid going to learn to read? And I thought, what else can I do? What do I have to do? And I thought, he can rhyme words and he can see patterns. With those two things, I can write a little poem. So I wrote a little poem. And the next day, instead of Nicholas panicking and trying to do things he couldn't do, he relaxed and he went, oh. And I read the poem to him. We read it together. We found the rhyming words. He illustrated it, blah, blah, blah. It just went on and on and on. Because there was one poem, then the next and the next and the next and the next. That was transformative. One lady spoke to me when I was in Oxford and she said, well, what's happening with Nicholas, this little boy? And I said, well, he's having a problem with reading. She came to my house and she said, I've got a book for you. And it was Hear It, See It, Say It to teach him decoding. I looked at it, this is perfect because it was multisensory. We touched everything. I made word puzzles. It was dealing with the CH, the SH and the TH, which are the digraph blends. Short vowel, A, E, A, E, O, and a consonant. Simple stuff. Nicholas took 8 weeks to go through that book. He took another 8 weeks or 6 weeks to go through the consonant blends, which are the TR, the DR, the PR, the PLs. I mean, he's very slow at this. However, the poetry came first and the poetry drove our lessons. And then double O comes up. as in Cook, look and book. And I wrote a poem. Captain Cook has a notion there's a gap in the map in the great big ocean. He took a look without the help of any book, hoping to find a quiet little nook. And the poem goes on. But poetry gives you these, these little common words with enormous ideas. So with that, we were at the Science Spectrum, the Science Museum in London, and we saw globes of the world. And they had them from, 10th century right through to the 20th century. And I looked at it and I said, Nicholas, look, there's a gap in the map. There's no Australia. And up to that point, I hadn't had a map. I hadn't had a globe. I thought the words would be enough. And I realized he needed pictures with words. And now we saw this, and lights went on in both our minds. Oh. And Nicholas said to me over time, he said, can I see Captain Cook's original maps? Was his first question. And then he said, who came before Captain Cook? And I said, well, that was easy, Nicholas. That was Christopher Columbus. And he said, and who came before Columbus? And I go, this kid doesn't have a low IQ. And I needed to see that, to even value what's going on in his brain. The growth with teaching of decoding was millimeters, measured in millimeters, but he was doing it. The growth in exponential thinking was, and then I could see this dichotomy. That's all right. And then because we're in Oxford, he asked, the guy that came before Columbus was a man called Ptolemy. And he came in 250 AD. He drew the world's first map. He put north at the top of the map. And Nicholas, where will we find a Ptolemy map? No idea, Nicholas, but we're in England. It'll be somewhere around. We go to the Bodleian Library. We go to the Bodleian Library gift shop and say, where would we see a Ptolemy map? The lady reaches around from behind the counter, picks up a book, plops it on the table and said, this is a book of Ptolemy maps. That'll be £5, please. So learning is not just happening in our classroom in the morning, it's happening everywhere. We went from the classroom to Oxford, and in Oxford, so and so and so, and these people were here, and this is what they did. And Nicholas is just like a little sponge with this information, learning everything. Anyway, we return to Australia, and I meet the lady who'd done the testing 12 months prior, who said he's got no strength, low IQ. And I said to her, we've had such a wonderful time. Here's me, I'm excited, I'm over the moon. And she says, I've spoken to the reading teacher and he's gone backwards. And in fact, he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching. Now, why am I here on your show? She put a fire in my belly eventually. When someone says things like that to me, I can't say anything. I can't respond. So I just walked away, really quite depressed. Within a couple of hours, I go back to the school and I said to the lady, you can call my son whatever you like, but don't expect him to learn like everyone else. And so her words were a real flag to me to say, okay, we've got a challenge on our hands. Let's just do it. And I knew then Nicholas was smart. I knew he could do things. How much he could do, no idea. But I knew that label that she gave him was not right. Okay. Now, this is your dyslexic daughters. That very afternoon, the reading teacher, Nicholas has two teachers. He has a classroom teacher who is absolutely wonderful, and he has a reading teacher. The reading teacher is now sending him home 10 sight words. You know those little words that are really difficult to learn? She's at least sending 10, not 20. Last year she'd send him 20. couldn't do any of that. 10, he knew 8 of the 10 words. He didn't know now, and he didn't know saw. But for saw, she gave him the same 2 sentences she gave every other child in her care. And the sentences were, I saw a cat climb up a tree, and I saw a man rob a bank. Nicholas read, I saw a cat. No. I was a cat. No. I had a cat. No. And then he just handed me the paper and gave up. It took me a while to work out what was going on. And I give this example to teachers because it's critical that they get it. Nicholas has in his mind the concrete meaning of the word saw, meaning to cut. I saw a cat, he cut the cat. No, you don't do that. I was a cat. No, I was never a cat. And the other 2 don't make sense. The teacher has given standardized sentence that she gave to everyone else. She's given the abstract meaning of the word saw and failed to show him what the reader has to do to understand reading. Now, how critical was my intervention at this time? Now, that's one point, right? She's failed to show the detailed meaning of how written language works. She gave an example. I saw a cat climb up a tree. We're living in Brisbane, Australia. Brisbane, Australia is hot. It's treed. There are native animals and native wildlife everywhere in the suburbs, not koalas or kangaroos, but smaller ones. So you've got birds, rainbow lorikeets everywhere. You've got cockatoos. You've got possums on roofs. You've got bats in the sky. Cats are destructive animals, and you're not encouraged to have outdoor cats in Australia because they eat the local wildlife. So why is she using a sentence like, I saw a cat climb up a tree? You'll never see it. That's number 2 problem. And number 3 problem, the child has just been in another country for 6 months and she couldn't find an example or ask Nicholas, what did you see when you were in England? Personalise the experience. And when I did it, I said, Nicholas, what did we do when we went to Windsor Castle? And Windsor Castle was huge for my boys because they had these swords and guns. And the kids were there. I said, Nicholas, when we went to Windsor, did we put a saw in our bag? So you give the opposite meaning. And we get to Windsor and we pull out our saw and we say, let's take a brick out of the wall. No, no one's looking. No, we didn't do that. What did we do? We looked at it. So it's a personal experience that he's been in. He knows we looked. When we went to see the Gutenberg Bible, Nicholas, did we take a saw with us? Oh, no, he said, never. What does it mean? Saw has the meaning of the word look. Yes, it means to cut, but it also means to look. It was the combination of the 2, the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching and really poor teaching, that drives me. Because without correcting that, the child has nothing. And how easily schools fit into that narrative of your child can't do anything. He didn't get it. He's not smart. Rather than what do we have to do to teach children to read? That put the fire in my belly. Then on top of that, jumping ahead, over the next years, I become a reading specialist. And so I have to go back to study to do this. I'm enrolled in the local university and they have an academic paper titled Beyond the Deficit Theory, written by an Australian academic. And it says, when children fail to learn to read, we say, look at their IQ. Well, look at their background. Well, look at this, look at that. And what we fail to do is give them adequate demonstrations of word. I lived the academic literature. Why am I on your show? Because those people put a fire in my belly.
Would it ever have got picked up, do you think, or when?
No. And in fact, when Nicholas is 11, we move continents again. He gets tested and he has the official label is second percentile speech language impaired. His ability to recall these isolated, abstract little words is 2 out of 100. And how quickly and easily that diagnosis in itself and his inability to learn in a regular way would have put him on the back burner. He can't learn, he's got a language problem, your child is done. And he has no memory. He's got no memory for words. See, we've got it on paper, he's got no memory for words. Fast forward 20 years. I don't know if the story will go down well or not. Do you know Gilbert and Sullivan stories?
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, you've heard them. Do you know any of the songs or anything in it?
I can't think of any, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah. Gilbert and Sullivan were phenomenal, and they were phenomenal in Australia in the 90s because a company did reproduce the Gilbert and Sullivan, and the parodies and the wordplay in them is phenomenal. And they're these big, long passages that an actor will say. Nicholas learned it. So for a child, you think he's got no memory for words, can 20 years later learn something from Gilbert and Sullivan. And the one he learned was, I am the very model of a modern major general. That's all I can remember. And it goes on and funny stuff. His memory was phenomenal. His memory for the isolated, the abstract and the irrelevant at 6 and 7 was really poor. We've got to find a way around that so that we can access his memory and he can learn to read. How does this resonate with you?
It makes so much sense. I think being diagnosed so late, as you say, it's only now you start actually putting pieces together and it's going, okay. I compensated through a mixture of bad behavior and out of school activities.
I really find it difficult to go down the alley what would have happened to Nicholas if we'd not been to Oxford. That was such a transformative period in both our lives. And we, as I said, we had 4 months of actual book learning. We would do 2 to 3 hours a day in the morning. When my youngest was at school, because I had 3 boys, the eldest went to school and made a mess of it. Nicholas was with me and the youngest was 3 and he had kindergarten 3 days a week. So while my in-laws were with us, I could teach Nicholas 4 or 5 days a week. The moment they left, I was down to just the 3 days because Nicholas wouldn't cooperate. But we think, teachers think reading is about the teaching of decoding. They forget all of the other foundational stuff that's needed to allow kids to fly. And so that experience is what drove me to become a reading teacher.
What's your feeling? And it's not a persecution of the teacher per se. Do you think is it ignorance, and not in the rude sense, just not knowing? Do you think it's?
Yes, absolutely.
Just don't know. Yeah.
They don't know. They don't know. It's a combination of both. One, they don't know, and then the second is that this child is not very smart. It's the combination. It's just one. And see what Nicholas's story has done for me is driven me to say, I'll teach this child to read. I'm not going to question their IQ. I'll question their language and their ability to understand language and their ability to remember it. Okay, why can't they remember it? But I'm not questioning their IQ or my ability to teach them. I'm going to change it until you read. And teachers go in with a fixed mindset. The other problem we have is that reading for vast majority of people happens by teachers doing minimal amount of work. They think if I teach these kids to decode, they get it. And the emphasis becomes on decoding. And the vast majority of kids get it, like about 60% will get it to some degree. And I would even place myself within that range. I learned to decode words. Many actually learn to do it more effectively, but then I'm on the borderline. Yes, I can decode words, but I can't comprehend. Once you get into that lowest 30% of the population, and it's language, it's not IQ, of their ability to understand language and read in language on paper, that's when teachers really need more knowledge, more experience, more time to engage these kids and work out what they have to do.
What did you find? Is there anything in particular that aggravated?
Yes. One, there's me. I was dyslexic. I am dyslexic. The second is Nicholas had ear infections from the age of 8 to 18 months. I knew there was a problem. What I didn't know was the impact that has on the child's brain. You know, for nearly 10 months of his life, of when the brain is growing exponentially, he is not hearing oral language. A critical component to learning to read is having good hearing. And I read in my readings, you only need one ear infection a year for 5 years to create a learning disability. And it impacts the child's hearing. It impacts the way the brain grows, because the brain starts with a whole lot of neurons. As the neurons, the brain starts to create waves or connections between each one. And the more it hears it, that's the connection that grows. If you're not hearing language, that connection's gone.
It almost explains, I suppose, maybe someone who's deaf, why speech would be less clear. Okay.
And when you have ear infections, not only when the child is completely deaf, in and out, the hearing is not accurate either. There's distortions to the sound, and it's why the consonant blends then. You know, the play, A and play. You know, there's that one sound that makes a difference. It is quite challenging for children. And then you've got the addition, not only the sound, but the language that they lack. They're not hearing the huge number of words that other children are hearing. So it becomes multifaceted where their deficits lie.
Yes. Was there any part of the learning he was taking up naturally, or do you just get a system shutdown and therefore it's nothing?
Puzzles.
Okay.
Nicholas was brilliant at puzzles. And you know, you take kids somewhere and you take activities with them. And we had this puzzle box, and it would have had 4, 6, 9, 12. 4 puzzles in them, each of different size and each of a different animal. And some academic or medical doctor was watching him, and he just said, that's amazing. And Nicholas would have been under 2, and he did it all independently. The challenge, who cares that you've got good spatial awareness when you're 6? It's not a skill anyone's looking at.
Yeah. And that's either down to teacher mentality or, you know, the rigidity of the system, right? And
they've got to learn to read. They've got to, and not only they have to learn this way. And I, you know, this is stories. Nicholas is now 33, so it's a while ago now, but I've learned so much, and I haven't stopped the learning, because I'll go on with the story. Because Nicholas learns to read by the time he's 7 3/4. And I knew, and in my book, I've got a wonderful chapter on that. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and there was this little voice talking, coming from the lounge room. And I got out of bed, and there was Nicholas reading a book that he'd read the year before, independently. He's dressed in his school uniform. Now, this is the first time Nicholas would have dressed himself. And he's reading a book. It's like, I can do this. And I'm there. Nicholas is reading. And that was a critical moment to see that he could read independently and be happy doing it. And he had phenomenal classroom teachers in grade 2, grade 3, and grade 4 in Australia. Phenomenal. And his third grade teacher, he still loves her. She was just so good. And she read a book to them. She would read a chapter a day. And then you never read any more that day. You've got to wait till tomorrow. So she had these kids on tenterhooks about reading. And in 1999, Nicholas is 11. He's in 5th grade. My husband takes a job in Lubbock, Texas. Now, I don't think that's a place you would know, but it's in the middle of West Texas, 6 hours from Dallas, northwest. Flat, brown, boring. People say there's not a hill or a tree to spoil the view. It's like a tablecloth. And you get, 19 inches of rain a year, 100 days above 100 in summer. So you live indoors. Anyway, we went there, but it is a university town. In my book, I identify 9 things that happened in Texas to Nicholas that would not have happened in Brisbane, Australia. And in Lubbock, Texas, Nicholas went from the bottom to the top. He graduated in the top 20% of his class with physics, chemistry, calculus, you name it, he did it.
Was that down to the teaching or to your awareness, do you think?
A lot of things, many things. The first, the whole story of Nicholas is a lesson not only in persistence, but if you want children to succeed, what do you have to do? In Brisbane, Australia, Nicholas is reading 20 minutes a night and everybody is happy because he's exceeded expectations. We didn't think he would read or write. Here he's doing both. Huh. We moved to Lubbock, Texas, and the first thing the principal said is, Nicholas is going into 5th grade. I think he should go into 4th grade, not 5th grade. This means Nicholas is repeating for a second time. And my husband says, well, won't he be old when he graduates from high school? And she said, that's a problem. However, we've got this class in middle school where he can do grades 7, 8, and 9 in 2 years. So he repeated 4th grade, does 7, 8, and 9 in 2 years, and then goes into high school with his peers. That was one. The second thing that happened is he goes to school and he comes home and he says, Mum, we've got to read a book and take a test. Okay, Nicholas, you read the book and take the test. It's a program that was set up in the school to encourage children to read. Most parents hated it in the end. Nicholas came home and at 7 o'clock at night, he goes to his bedroom and starts reading. At 9 o'clock at night, I'm knocking on his door saying, Nicholas, it's time to go to bed. Nicholas read for 2 hours a night, 5 and 6 and 7 nights a week to read one Goosebumps book. So you've got persistence, you've got time on task, you've got a system in the school that Nicholas is willing to put the effort into. That in itself was huge. He's no longer reading 20 minutes a night, but 2 hours a night. That was number 2. And number 3 is once you start doing this level of reading, you see, he's putting in so much effort. Again, he's like treading water in the pool, isn't he? He's getting stronger, but he's taking too long to read it. Because Lubbock is hours and hours and hours and hours for any other town. Whenever you drive anywhere, we listen to books on CD. If you've got a problem, you've got to have the language. And Nicholas was the first thing, what book are we listening to now? And so you start listening to get the language of his peers. It's a real study in what you have to do to be successful in school.
Was there any provision in the schools at that time for dyslexia?
Oh, it's a con job, isn't it, really? When Nicholas went from Australia to the US, he has to be retested. And to qualify is the word for special education services, Nicholas had to have a gap, a 15-point gap between his performance and his IQ. Nicholas has got a language problem. IQ tests are all based in language. How well is he going to do on an IQ test? In fact, his performance is above his IQ. No, your child doesn't qualify for special education because there's no gap in his performance and IQ. And that becomes another story about who has access to services. And then I became a reading specialist and I went to Lubbock. One of the first people I meet is a mother whose 13-year-old child had spent 4 years in a phonics-only reading program because he was dyslexic. So we put you in this program. 4 years. He came out non-reading. Totally non-reading, unable to read anything. And I said, I think I know what to do. And I spoke to him on a podcast and he said, you know, before she came along, I thought, you know, she won't be able to do it. I just can't do this reading stuff. And she doesn't know what she's got here because I can't read. I taught him to read. And I taught him to read over a summer. At the end of the summer, the mother contacted the school district and said, you employ this woman or I sue you. I got employed. And so now I'm in touch with children who've failed the reading program. And I've seen what they have done to these children who they label dyslexic is they shove them in a reading program that's phonics based, that is so boring it would kill me, and it killed the children. And they have this blinkered idea on what is required to teach children to read. And it's not child-centered. They're not engaged in learning. They're not actively engaged. And. Have I got a fire in my belly?
You're saying there it's phonics based. Is phonics not a suitable method?
No, that's not the problem. The challenge is phonics is one component of a complex problem.
Okay. And
they only see the one component. They fail to ask, is the child engaged in our lesson? Because, you know, I'm going to teach you something, all right? Maybe I'm going to teach you a foreign language, all right? And I sit here and all I do for you is give you these letters and sounds. What chance have you got of learning to read?
Very slim.
Talking to you, I'm not showing you how this works. I'm not engaging you. You are going to do these letters and these sounds and you're going to get it. And if you don't get it today, we're going to repeat it again tomorrow and the next day and the next. Did it work? And it's that, again, it's that fixed mindset. This is what you have to do. On my website, I have a free download and it's called MAPS, M-A-P-S, for a number of reasons. But the M, it's an acronym. M is for mindset. And mindset is, what do I as a teacher have to do to teach you to read? And if my mindset is, this is what I have to do, and just go through these letters and sounds and not think, what else do I have to do? Is the child actively engaged in my lesson? Is the child working toward it? Because reading is not about decoding words on paper. I could do that. I couldn't comprehend. It's about being actively engaged in learning. And you can't, and there's another quote, isn't there? I think it's Galileo. You can't teach anybody anything. You can only create circumstances where they can learn. I think that's the quote. I'll have to look it up.
But that perfectly defines the average schooling system.
What's that?
Well, in that, and it may well work, the method of information transfer is, that sort of teaching. We will show you, you will learn, you will repeat, you will do whatever, right? But then the cookie cutter just doesn't fit everyone. So hence you have, that's the system, right?
And that's where you have your divided road. Those that can do it that way and those that can't do it that way. So, and they get left, and they get left behind. And who else gets left behind? And what brain power do we lose in that process? And the emotions that go on. I mean, oh dear.
What's more important, passion or IQ?
IQ is a measure. It's a measure on paper. Persistence is more important. Passion, yes, I agree with you. Passion is more important. I don't know what IQ is, really. I don't know what IQ is. I don't know I do know what you mean, because, my husband and all these people at universities would have high IQ. Nicholas won't have a high IQ because he doesn't have a high language score. What do we mean when we say IQ? And see, it's fascinating because we go back to a child, and you listen to a child talk and you'll say, oh, that's a really smart kid. Why? Because the words are babbling out of their mouth. And you look at a child that's not talking and you instantly think, you mightn't say, that kid's not very smart. It's got nothing to do with smart. This one's got language and that one hasn't. And all we see is language. We don't see these other things. And Nicholas still today, Nicholas is slower at speech and thinking. So that if you give him a question, you'll notice there's a longer lag time before he answers. And that's the words have got to spin around. He's got to take your question and think, what are they saying? And then he's got to get the words and then put those words in the right order to come out, so that they come out in a way that you can understand. So even at times today, he doesn't look as smart as what he is. You would never know that he can do mathematics way beyond you.
Is some of that a technique, to sort of just slow it down, not to get wrapped up in the hype of the pressure, or do you know what I mean, to answer a question? Is it part of it?
It's part of the process for Nicholas. He's certainly much, and the brain, that the ear infections and the roots, it's a longer road. It's not the highway. It's a detour every time, and he's not able to go a faster route. So his processing speed for language is certainly slower, still today.
What was your husband's take on this? Because I'm assuming Jim, he doesn't have dyslexia, does he?
No. He's phenomenal. He's an engineer. You're right. He doesn't have dyslexia, but I remember my mother-in-law telling me that he failed in grade 8. He failed his English in grade 8. And the teacher said, well, he'll never go to university because he can't spell. None of that's true. And he changed schools. He changed schools in 10th grade. I might have got the years wrong, but he changed schools in 10th grade, and he was behind when he went to the next school. He worked his butt off. He had a teacher who taught him to write effectively, and he graduated at the top of the school. There were 4 people that would graduate at the top of the school. He was one of them. and he got prizes in physics and mathematics, I think. So the way we teach impacts the way students learn. Did that answer your question? No, he's not dyslexic, but he obviously had more of a struggle with learning language than he did with mathematics. And his story is fascinating too, because he said in 8th grade, we had a maths club in the high school. And we had this teacher who would just take us for lunchtime mathematics. I mean, can you imagine that? It's the ability to play. It's not tested. This is a game. And the amount of stuff he's learning is phenomenal. And it fed for him a lifetime of loving mathematics.
Again, we're back to the power of the teacher,
Yeah.
and in the positive and the negative, right? So, but if someone can break down and communicate a concept to you in a way that's readily digestible, then you will feel connected to them. You will learn the subject, and even though it may or may not be your thing, but it's understandable. Therefore, it probably will become your thing.
I'll continue on with my story because my learning hasn't stopped. Okay, so in 2007, Nicholas graduates high school. He wins the Yes I Can Award from Exceptional Children for academics. And we return to Australia. Nicholas starts doing engineering and mathematics. He starts in the engineering degree, and because Tasmania, University of Tasmania is small, he has to do the mathematics in the mathematics department, not the engineering department. He fell in love with the mathematics professor and the mathematics again, and kept slipping and doing more and more mathematics. In 2012, he graduates with honours degree in engineering and mathematics. This kid who couldn't do anything. And then at the end of that, he's applying for scholarships, and he has a scholarship to do a PhD in applied mathematics at Oxford University. So from the worst child I've seen to PhD Oxford. In 2018, he graduated with his PhD. And that was a big deal. But it was a community that brought us there. When Nicholas was 7 and he's reading, I knew I'd done so much to get him to that point. But from there on, it was a community that created Nicholas, that level of studies. And what happened after that was I thought, now I'll be able to ask Nicholas what happened in first grade. And I said to him, Nick, what happened? Can you tell me what happened in first grade? Because he's articulate, he's confident, he talks to anyone. My son cried, and not a word emerged from his mouth. And that's when I realised what happened in first grade was a traumatic experience that no child should ever have to go through. And how I wish I had removed him from school on day 6.
As you say, though, the system's just not set up that way. You'd be, I don't know how severe they take it, but I know here you would be potentially brought to the police.
Yeah.
That
teacher said it on day 6, he's so far behind, he can't do a single thing. And what I didn't know was that she shouted at him every single day of that year. And he learned, I'm dumb, can't do it, I'm not like everybody else. Horrendous, horrendous, horrendous. And because of that, I've started a podcast series titled When Learning is Trauma, because that's what happened. And then, the turnaround came because we were in Oxford. And it was, and then I said to Nicholas too, okay, we're not going to talk about what happened in first grade. Tell me what happened in Oxford. And it was like, oh, a switch. And he's now not crying, he's laughing. And he said to me, oh, well, I remember the poems that you wrote for me. And he named the poems 20-something years later. He could tell you exactly what poems were. And he said, and the mapping, well, The mapping taught me to love learning. I never want to stop learning. And then he started to giggle, and it was a 7-year-old giggle. And he said, "You wrote a poem about a witch's spell." I said, "I did." And he said, "We wrote the ingredients for the witch's spell." And it was just so funny. Now, what was so interesting and hilarious to me, in my book, I did not comment one thing about this witch's spell poem at all. Why not? Because as an adult, my poem was not worthy to show the world. What I ignored was Nicholas's response. I knew that he was laughing, that when people would come to our door occasionally, he would run to our room and pick up this book and say, read this. And it wasn't the poem, it was read his ingredients. And what do children remember? What's important is the emotion I created through doing that crazy poem. My poem was written with the idea of learning spit, spot, spell, and spin. So it was a naughty little witch spitting in a spell and spinning on the spot. But it was the ingredients that grabbed Nicholas for life. So in my next book, I'm writing that, and how the emotion is critical. And then my sister, my younger sister, she's a psychiatric nurse. She and I were talking about this, and she said, "Lois, you did what you had to do. You created the learning environment for Nicholas that was critical, and he was safe. He was happy. And when the brain is like that, the brain learns. The brain does not learn under stress. And so when Nicholas was in first grade, there's no way in the world he was learning a single thing. His brain was shut down, nothing goes in, nothing goes out. But he needed to know he was safe. And then not only was safe, he tapped into his curiosity. And that's when the growth in his brain happened. And so now I do a lot of reading on the emotion involved in learning, and the power and the importance of creating this environment where children are happy, they're laughing, because laughter attaches to memory. And so emotions are not an optional extra in learning. Emotions are critical to our learning. And critical because they allow us to access memory.
What's your fire in the belly?
We cannot let children sit in our classrooms and say, well, look at them, look at their IQ. They can't read. My fire in the belly is that we must teach these children who sit on the sidelines of our society. That's my fire in the belly. Now, it happened when that lady said he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching, followed by, I saw a cat, which he'd never ... seen. Yet he had seen a Gutenberg Bible. Come on. And an academic paper saying exactly that drives me. And do we engage children? Are we creating active learners? That's my fire in the belly. And guess what? 12 months ago, a mother contacts me from Houston, and she's in tears. I didn't know her. She'd read my book. She'd read my book, when it first came out in 2018, and this is 2020, so 2 years. She said, Lois, my 16-year-old, he's nearly 16, he can't read a single thing. We spent 4 years in a school for dyslexic learners, and he's come out, he's not reading. They're telling me he's got a low IQ. He's got no phonemic awareness, blah, blah. And so the words are just flowing out of her. And I said, well, would you like me to teach him? We'll see how it goes. Let's just try one lesson. The first thing I do with children is ask them to give me a sentence with the word TO. So I write it in the chat box. Give me a sentence with the word TO. This kid is 15 years old, 16 in September. What does he say? He says, I've got 2 lizards the same. He catches lizards in his backyard. So I've got 2 lizards the same. What's he done? What sentence do you expect for the word TO? To school. He's still, I've got 2 lizards. Give me a sentence with the word FOR. And he said, I have 4 grey sharks' teeth. Why can't this kid read? If you don't understand the difference between TO and TWO, and FOR and FOUR and you're 16-year-old, you won't learn to read. The decoding on top is irrelevant because you haven't understood the basics. It's foundational. And you want to know the big news? There's a lot of stories here. I have had an academic paper published. Lots of things. Which is huge for me. Because I'm dyslexic. I struggle with writing. What I did was I contacted a professor who'd read my book, and we'd talked and communicated and done things. And I said, I can't write a paper on my own. It'll get rejected. He said, send it to me. I sent him the paper, and he said, this belongs in the Reading Teacher, which is a premier magazine for the International Literacy Association. So if you want to read the article, you have to join the International Literacy Association, which is about $35, and then access the Reading Teacher. And my paper is on pronouns, these little words, he, she, they, them, and it. And that children read the words and fail to work out what the meaning is. My student from Houston was one of these. And so it's pronouns and words with multiple meanings. But that's another fire in my belly. It's everything I do is foundational. I'm not doing high-level thinking at the beginning, but I'm making sure my students understand how the written language works. Then we can, and how we do that. Are we use da, 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 da. That's my fire in the belly.
How is your son's fire in the belly? Because I mean, this is a lot of attention for him, for a young boy at the time, you know, which, you know, the sort of individual attention, this extra work, or what might be perceived as extra work. How did he take to it?
He's got a lot of my husband in him. I'm persistent. He's persistent. You know, he's got a drive. I mean, he works ridiculous hours now, ridiculous hours. He loves learning. You know, I struggle to, as I said, I struggle to think what would have happened if he hadn't learnt to read, because he's phenomenal. He's married this wonderful lady who has got a brain as good as his, and she's got really incredible language skills. So they might be all right if and when they have children. But, you know, he just loves learning, and he knows so much. He knows stuff that blows me away. You know, the whole thing, and he's still in Oxford. And he said the other day, you know, I can't believe this city has become so important to me. I mean, and he grows up and he just flits off all of the incidences, I think. But I think as he gets older, he'll be aware of what a privileged life he's had. He knows that he needed to succeed.
The trip to Oxford, or that trip overseas, was that consequential? Was that something you were doing as a family anyway, or was it tied together? So I'm not quite sure.
Well, my husband's professor, and he had study leave, so we had 6 months study leave there.
Right. Okay.
So he was going back with his work, and it, you know, just happened to be the year Nicholas was 7. He'd failed that first grade. You know, if it had been a year later, it would have made a difference, because Nicholas would have been that much further behind, and there'd been that much more failure in school. As much as anything, it changed my attitude. Because when you talk to Nicholas as a 6 or 7-year-old, you could see he knew things, but the length of time he took to get the answer out, good grief, it took forever. You know, it was really hard work. And that's what you see. And you can't see this kid who's capable of getting a PhD. So one of the things I say when I talk to teachers and I talk to parents, instead of seeing this child as having a language deficit or a learning disability, let's see them as future rocket scientists. Because it's us that have to change, and it's our attitude that has to change.
When I was diagnosed, I found it quite fascinating, the process. I'm a curious person. So this was for any of the listeners, just really the way I was diagnosed was that it was an IQ test. but there's also I'm going to say a literary test and a numerical test. There was about 5 or 6 sets of tests, I think, in total, if I remember rightly. And the results back were that my reading and writing were below average.
As simple as below average.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
But my interpretation and spatial awareness were significantly above average, which, when collated and brought together in whatever way the numbers are run, gives me a slightly higher than average IQ in this method of measuring. And now I only went there for the piece of paper, or the confirmation, put it that way, so that I knew that if I had it, chances are we would look out for it with my girls. Understanding that was a complete game changer for me.
Really? Tell me. I want to know more.
It's fascinating because I'm not saying, I was saying earlier, it's like I will never read or write for leisure or pleasure, you know? So I would have taken, so typically, and I was a relatively high achiever in London at the time. I had a, very good job, and I would go into a meeting for 1 hour, and then I would do the most very extensive notes, but it would take me 2 or 3 hours. Yes. But I would compensate by working longer hours. So everyone else would see these excellent notes. It was very useful. Now I needed that also because I felt my memory was weak. So I was saying that's why I was accounting for it, but I was sort of going, fuck me, 1 hour equals 3 hours of meetings and notes. So the person who diagnosed me says, well, change your form. Okay. So learn how you learn. And this is an expression I love, is learn how you learn. So one of the things I changed at that time was, whilst I might never pick up a book for that, it is ironic because I run a book club every morning. The irony hasn't left me, but actually for me to learn, I will do it by listening. Yes. And not only that, and another game changer for me was to actually listen at a higher speed. Okay? Yes. So I will listen to everything at speed 1. I get bored and I switch off. I don't engage. At to higher speeds, even 1.5 is probably a bit much, but but when I get the speed right, I will literally devour. It's a bit like you were saying with your son there. It's actually when the opportunity comes, suddenly you read and read. When you find that sweet point, the sweet spot. And that was the game changer for me. People would say to me, before I would have had, now I say to people, don't send me an email any more than 1 paragraph long. Because honestly, I'm not going to read it. I won't. And people think I'm being rude. It's like, no, I just genuinely won't. If you want notes from this meeting, we record it and I'll send you the recording. And so within 5 minutes after the meeting, my work is done.
You'll have it. And it's not 2 hours or 3 hours later.
The relief that's given me is huge. Absolutely huge. And it's like, it's forgiving yourself for the stuff that just doesn't come to you naturally, rather than going, oh, I'm a terrible reader and I'm this and that. And it's like, yes, you are, maybe. But at the same time, you overcompensate perfectly elsewhere. So for that reason, it's actually been one of the most useful things, to see that. And I saw it, my niece, and they caught it fairly early in her schooling. She was starting to flag up and she was showing up in some of the test results. She wears glasses, I don't know what you call them, the filter glasses. So she wears the yellow ones and the yellow paper. Game changer. Which is lovely to see, and I now mentor in some schools, and a lot of them, there's a couple of schools here locally who are turning to all dyslexia-led learning. So instead of doing it by exception, they're doing it by
rule.
By rule, exactly. So everyone gets yellow paper, and they said
not on white.
So they've changed all the school font. I don't know which is the whatever it is, but they changed the font. They changed all the paper. So instead of then like trying to pick up the people who are dyslexic.
Yes.
Saying, well, we'll
You
just
just
teach
do it for
everyone.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which again,
That's
you kind
brilliant.
of going, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. This should have been done. And the listening. My book is on audio.
Good.
It's available on my website and on Amazon, and you will need to speed it up. But, you know, it's not only that, it's that teaching went from being, you know, this dull thing where I was terrifying my son to this is so exciting. And that's what we should be doing for every child. And watching Nicholas grow, watching him get it was a game changer. And not only Nicholas, every other student that I taught, they're getting it. They want to be there. You know, but we have to value teachers' time. The stuff that I did doesn't come easily. Once you've set it up, it's fine. But it takes time to build that up. And it takes time to build up the knowledge that I took to learn about teaching these kids too. Now, we don't value that either. We just want it to be quick, do it, and do it this way. And you can't. And our children, they're at the beginning of their lives. The cost of losing them is too much. We can't push them aside. That's another fire in the belly that we like Nicholas. Nicholas got a PhD in applied mathematics from Oxford University. That's the child that we wrote off at 7. How many more are we writing off? We're putting them in prison. We're doing this and that and the other. And then we've got a gate to say, oh, you can't access evidence because your IQ's not high enough.
I think there's almost, for me, and this the whole precipice of this show almost is, you know, this pandemic of okay or good. It's, you know, and unfortunately, I think it's a ridiculously high statistic that people will live a good life. People will live an okay life, or they will have an okay education or a good education. And you kind of go in the decision tree of life, it should be absolutely, definitely yes or hell no.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's too many people sitting because maybe the system just about gets them through, but it certainly doesn't they don't necessarily learn how they learn. As you say, they learn enough to read a book, but they certainly don't learn enough to actually learn how to read fully and properly and engage and grow that as a skill set.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's not to take away from the likes of your son, you know, or anyone that's been caught, but it's also there's a whole lot of bland nothingness in the middle. It's like you were saying with Texas. It's like, there's just, you know, that it's scary.
I find, you know, from watching, accountability for teachers has been detrimental for student learning. And the accountability comes in the name of test scores. We want every child in this school to be at this level, at this grade. And I don't know what it's like in Ireland, but in the US, the expectation of what children can read at the age of 8 or 9, to me, is crazy. You know, and everyone's going, well, they don't. And then when they don't get there, then we give them more phonics instead of all the other things that we need. What we've done to education, and then education in this country is based on multi-choice questions. If you want to kill learning, give me a multi-choice question, because I've read the passage. Did I get it right or did I get it wrong? That's the end of my learning. And I have this phenomenal poem about a man called Anton Leeuwenhoek. I bet you've never heard of him. Do you want me to read the poem to you?
Please do, yeah. That'd be awesome.
I've found it. I've got it here. Oh, look at this. This is what I do. It's called The Microscope, and it says, Anton Leeuwenhoek was Dutch. He sold pincushions, cloth and such. The waiting townsfolk fumed and fussed as Anton's dry goods gathered dust. He worked instead of tending store at grinding special lenses for a microscope. Some of the things he looked at were mosquito wings, the hair of sheep, the legs of lice, the skin of people, dogs and mice, ox's eyes, spider spinning gear, fish's scales, a little smear of his own blood, and best of all, the unknown busy, very small bugs that swim and bump and hop inside a simple water drop. Impossible, most Dutchmen said. This Anton's crazy in the head. We ought to ship him off to Spain. He says he's seen a housefly's brain. He says the water we drink is full of bugs. He's mad, we think. They called him Dummkopf, which means dope. That's how we got the microscope. And what struck me is I saw this piece on the internet, which I've been using for years, and after it came some multi-choice questions. And I thought that just killed it for me.
You were doing so well.
It stops you asking further questions.
Hmm.
So who was Anton Leeuwenhoek? What did he do? Why is he important? How does the pin cushions and that tie into microscopes? Do you want to know the story behind it?
Please do, yeah.
He was a Dutchman who was a cloth merchant. And a cloth merchant, I think is 1560s. I could be wrong with that, or 1660s, around that time. To count the cloth, he needed a magnifier. And he needed to grind lenses to magnify things. And obviously his curiosity got the better of him. And he went from not only looking at cloth, but to all the other things that are microscopic. He was our first microscope. He was a Dutchman. He wrote to the English Society and said, these are the things I found. And he's now recognized as the father of the microscope. He came before Hooke and Boyle. And so when I read this poem, I had 16-year-olds and we're doing it. And he said, now we need to see a microscope. Experience plays into this as well. And that's what happened to Nicholas in Oxford. Learning did not just happen in our classroom, but it spilled out to everything we were doing over all sorts of levels. And with the experience came the emotion of joy and happiness. And this is so exciting. And that's what that poem does for me, because it makes you ask questions. Who was Anton Leeuwenhoek? How did he do it? And you know, we were at the British Library one day, and what's there? The letters of Anton Leeuwenhoek to the British Society in Dutch. Couldn't read them, no translation. But he was one of the first ones. And again, he was a man outside the system. He wasn't within the community. So my passion are for people who are outside of the system, who knock it, who give us knowledge that we don't expect to come from somewhere else. And how, again, the mindset is we are right and you are wrong. And we've got it right and we don't want to know you. So do you know about longitude?
Yeah.
The finding of longitude?
I don't know about the finding of it, no.
The finding of longitude, fascinating story. Fascinating story. And so all this has come from my teaching. So, you know, my learning was really dull growing up. And now with my husband, who just explores everything, with my children and my teaching of Nicholas, my world has just gone poof. And I want my students to know that the world we live in is just phenomenal. And there's so much to learn. And it goes so much beyond the teaching of decoding. I have a fire in my belly for so many things. But leaving children behind is the worst thing we can possibly do, because we don't know what brain we are leaving behind.
I have a live hypothesis that if you are alive and have a beat in your heart, you have a fire in your belly. Now, that may be a towering inferno of fire, or that may be the most distant, far off, tiny, minute flame. But I do believe you have to be, you know, if you're alive, you have. And as you talk and you describe, and even, you know, and it was one of my questions is this your purpose? Is this your calling? You know, and because the amount of energy you give off when you speak about it, obviously it's something that's been, I'm sure at the time it was quite challenging, let's say. But now it's there, and it actually, there's so much energy is given off, you know, so this exothermic type, you know, which is fantastic. And I think everyone has that if they find their thing.
The passion, yeah.
You know, would you describe this as your calling? Is this your purpose, do you think?
Oh, definitely, definitely. To just, to education, to put a little spoke in it and think wider. And as I say again and again and again, the children that we write off, and Nicholas could have been one of those children. It just blows my mind. And then we just put them in prison. And Nicholas is learning. Okay, this was dramatic for me. Yes, it is my purpose. Nicholas is the top of the academic tree. He's white, he's male, and he lives in a first world country. And they failed him. If you add layers to that, a colour, a race, a socioeconomic disadvantage, the chances of you getting out of that drops again and again and again. And Nicholas moved from country to country, not school to school, not state to state, but from country to change his life. Never should that be a requirement to become successful. Got a fire in my belly. That's why I contacted you. I thought, I've got to talk here.
I love it. I mean, there's just so much here, and it's so inspiring that you've done this. Talk to us. How did the book come about? What triggered you to collate it and bring it about?
My husband, we went back to Australia in 2007, and by 2010, my husband, stressed out of his brain, and he was offered a job in upstate New York, and he took it. So for a year or a couple of years, we had 3 children on 3 continents. I follow my husband, and eventually I go back to school because I can't teach up here. That's what I find out. I cannot teach in upstate New York. My qualifications, I haven't been through the nice, simple little steps and followed. So in 2015, I've completed my master's degree. I thought, what do I want to do? My friend said, what do you really want to do? And I said, I want to tell Nicholas' story. I can't write. I'm dyslexic. I've not practiced. But Nicholas has gone from this kid who can't do anything to PhD. By that time, he's in the PhD program. So I sat down and wrote my story for 6 months. And of course, it's a total mess and tenses are everywhere in one sentence. And I start going to writing classes. And at the writing class, I meet a young girl who's my son's age. And she said, Lois, I'll help you write it. She worked with me for a year to write this story that I am now so proud of, because it wouldn't have happened without her. And it's a story you want to read. And my father read it and he said, Lois, I just didn't want to put it down. I just wanted to turn the pages. What do you want from a story? You want someone to turn the page. And so that's how it came about. So now I've got the reading program to help other children. I didn't think I'd be able to write a reading program because I do quite a lot of individual work, but I met this guy who only learned to read when he was in his 20s. He connected through LinkedIn, and together we've now got a reading writing program that we're just starting to sell. And you come up again against, people who are 16, 15, non-reading, and they're writing on it, spelling on a second grade reading, second grade level. And they can't do basic stuff that they should be able to do. So that's how it came about. So I'm up every day trying to sell my book or sell this, or not so much sell, but promote. We've got children to read. And it's been a fascinating journey because I've tried to talk and be paid to talk, and no one wants me. And people turn around, and say things like, well, your book, it's just a story. I can't tell you what I think about that.
Well, to give it its proper title, so it's Reversed, a memoir by Lois Letchford. So if you're looking on, so it's available in all the formats. So you paper copy, your audio, and Kindle version as well, right?
Yes. And the audio version, I read it, and so it's good. Yeah, it's an abridged version, the audio, because the reading, like you say, as a dyslexic, to read aloud is a real challenge, and I hadn't done enough practice when I did that one. My readings got better aloud, but you realize there's the muscles that need to work to do all the talking have to work, and it's a bigger challenge than
I read my own book for Kindle or for Audible earlier this year, And yes, it took a lot longer. I think the recording time in the studio, I think I had to double it,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
only for the fact it was super convenient. I probably would have gone, get me somebody who can read
Yes.
quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's there just with a bit of extra time and so I get it. I totally get it, and I tip my hat to you. That's awesome. It's awesome.
Things we put ourselves into.
If you were to describe your fire in the belly in 1 or 2 words, what would they be?
1 or 2 words?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's got to be teach kids to read. 4 words.
Teach kids to read.
But tap into that curiosity.
Mm.
Do something. Do something. Don't let failure take over. There's 4 sentences.
It's inside everyone, isn't it, really? It's a case of how you're going to get it out.
Yeah.
It's not a case of if, it's a case of how.
Yeah, that's right. It's going to be how. How are we going to do it? And I think, we have to give teachers a bit more time. Life is getting really tough now. Really tough for our kids. So.
There's a book, Black Box Thinking.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's Black Box Thinking, and I want to say, oh God, I can't remember the author's name anyway, but it'll come back to me. But it's super interesting that they talk about the difference between the US hospital system and then I think it's the US airline system.
Oh, right.
So comparing a plane to a hospital and how they deal with crisis, how they deal with situations.
Yeah.
And so in hospitals, it's more or less, to summarize and to just steal the plot of the book slightly, but in hospitals, it's a case of, as we say with teachers, it's a case of, it's all about the stats. Why would you want to uncover because there's no embargo. If there's a problem, there's no sort of explanation, there's nothing, there's no leeway. So as a result, you're more or less prompted to hide it. Whereas in the airline industry, they almost celebrate this. And you get, if you come forward with a problem, you get if you come in within 2 weeks, you get immunity from prosecution. Or all this. The thing is, they promote this open environment, and they take an event that happens on the ground as serious as an event in the sky, and doing all this, and it's just fascinating. And how it ultimately then lends up into a completely different set of scenarios. Whereas aviation industry, they are excelling in excellence. And the hospitals are, well, you're fine until you make your next mistake, and then you're gone. And it's fascinating. It's a read that might be of interest to you.
I've read 2 books. One is Curiosity and one is Why. Curiosity by Ian Leslie. Let me just get them down.
Mm-hmm. This is a curious picture because you're leaning into a virtual bookshelf and pulling out a book.
I see. Look, I've got books everywhere. This is Curiosity by Ian Leslie and Why by Mario Lavia. And I think it's in Curiosity. They talk about, they talk about an accident on a plane in 1987. I think somewhere, no, it's at the end. The plane, the pilots are talking as they're taking off. The plane takes off and boom, it crashes. When they did the analysis, they couldn't believe what happened, that the pilots had failed to do something with the flaps, and they aligned it to driving through the garage door. It's one of the first things you should have seen. And why did it happen? Why were these pilots so blind? There's a young girl, she's an engineer, she's not a pilot, comes and looks at this data from her point of view, and she said what she did was doing a PhD in something or other, but she wanted the pilots to think through scenarios rather than just run through checklists and work out why it was going on. her work was implemented, and there have been no accidents like that since that day. But it was thinking, I should find the chapter, I won't do it instantly, but it's encouraging the people to think through the scenarios rather than just do a checklist. And that's what we don't do with teaching.
As you were saying with your son, it's that transformation of a word into matching it with a picture, right?
Yes.
Taking it into a story. This is not just a list. This is a story, a list, and here's what you should see, and tie all the things together, and then it makes a proper picture, right?
Yeah. And you as the reader have got to do some work.
Mm.
You can't sit down and just read the words like I was doing as a kid.
Yeah.
And my brain is going bizarre and coming up with nothing.
Mm.
You know, you've got to come up with something that makes sense, that's sequential, and you could follow it so that when someone talks, this is the response. Yeah. So
powerful.
Yeah.
Where can people learn more, hear more, see more, reach out, get the book, find more about yourself?
LoisLetchford.com is my website. I'm on LinkedIn. I've been a bit slack this week. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, but certainly my website. Email me, contact me through my website. My company is Teaching Students with Dyslexia. And if you have a child who is behind, contact us, and you'll be surprised what we can do. You know, and I believe in children. I believe we can teach them.
Mm. Powerful. Is there a final message you'd like to leave with people?
Believe in that child that's struggling. And reach out for help. You're not alone.
Wow.
That's the final message. And my fire in my belly, it's still there, Pete.
Love it. Love it. Lois, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. I have a feeling we could talk for all day pretty much. And I know for me, it's very refreshing to hear it and to see, you know, being such an advocate of it, you know, and I think it's, you know, the ripples will be felt for quite some time. So thank you for sort of grabbing the torch and running. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Lois. Take care.
Pete, before you go, I do a series of When Learning is Trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to join us at some stage and
tell a
story?
I'd be absolutely honored.
Oh, perfect. We talk on a Monday afternoon. Oh, I have to check your time zone. I'm looking at next year, January, February.
Sure.
And we do YouTube Live, but we'll adjust the timing so that it's not 10 o'clock at night for you or something.
That's fine. Well, 10 o'clock at night works because when you got young kids, you let them get to bed.
So how old are your girls now?
So I have, my oldest is 4 and I have twins and they're 2.5. So three under 5 is, yeah, fun.
Oh, all the best.
Rich blessings. So yes.
Okay, yeah, well, at 4 o'clock our time, Eastern time, I'll send you an email because that would just be fun to get your story and
I'd be honored.
Your journey, and you know, just promoting that we can't leave children traumatized in school. It's something we expect children to go through.
Yeah.
So
I'd be honored.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Until the next time.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.